Have you ever felt like you're living a life that isn't your own? Like every decision, every sacrifice is made to please someone else? Today's story is about a person who, after years of silent obedience, finally found their voice. It's a journey from being a pawn in someone else's game to becoming the master of your own destiny. If you've ever felt trapped, or know someone who has, then this story is for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this journey unfolds. My name is Elias, and for the last 40 years, I've been what you might call a good brother. I thought that's what I was supposed to be. Reliable, dutiful, always there. But as I sat at my small kitchen table, the varnish worn thin from decades of use, staring at the angry red of the final notice, I realized that good was just another word for used. The house was quiet, but it was a heavy silence, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and a loneliness that had become my closest companion. This house was mine. My parents had left it to me, their youngest son, the one who had stayed to care for them in their final years. It was modest, but it was a fortress of memories. Every scuff on the floorboards, every crack in the plaster told a story. And now, my older brother Marcus wanted me to sell it. It hadn't started with the house. It never does. It started small, like a slow leak in the ceiling. $100 here for a can't-miss investment. $1,000 there for a minor emergency with his car. Marcus had always been the charismatic one, the one with the grand plans and the silver tongue. I was the quiet one, the steady one, the one with the steady job at the local library, the one who lived a simple life and saved his money. His wife, Clara, was a different kind of storm. Where Marcus was all bluster and charm, Clara was a quiet, insidious pressure. She had a way of making you feel small, of framing her outrageous requests as perfectly reasonable, and your hesitation as a sign of selfishness. "Oh, Elias," she'd say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Surely you can see this is for the best. We're family, after all. Family." That word had become a weapon in their hands. They wielded it with surgical precision, carving away at my savings, my peace of mind, my very sense of self. My pension, which I had so carefully nurtured for 40 years, was the first major casualty. Marcus had a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity, a chance to open a high-end restaurant. He painted a picture of a future where we would all be rich, where I would never have to worry about money again. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. I remember the day I signed the papers. My hand trembled as I held the pen. A knot of dread was tangled in my stomach. A cold, hard stone of intuition telling me this was a mistake. But Marcus was there, his arms slung around my shoulders, his voice a low, reassuring hum. And Clara was there, smiling her tight, expectant smile. A silent testament to the disappointment that would follow if I refused. So I signed. I drained my future to fund their fantasy. The restaurant, of course, was a disaster. It lasted less than a year, collapsing under the weight of Marcus's mismanagement and Clara's expensive tastes. But they weren't the ones who paid the price. I was. My pension was gone. My savings were a ghost of what they once were. And still they came to me, their hands outstretched, their faces etched with a practiced look of desperation. Now, it was the house. "It's too big for you, Elias," Marcus had said, his voice laced with that infuriatingly casual tone he used when he was about to ask for the impossible. "You're rattling around in here all alone. Think of the upkeep, the property taxes. It's a burden, a burden." This house, the only thing I had left of our parents, the only real security I had in the world, was a burden. Clara had chimed in, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "And think of us, Elias. We're in such a bind. This would solve everything. You could get a small apartment, something more manageable. We could even help you find one." The audacity of it took my breath away. They wanted to sell my home from under me, the home they had never bothered to visit unless they needed something. And they were framing it as an act of kindness. They saw my life not as a life but as a resource, a well from which they could draw whenever they were thirsty. And I, the fool, had let them. For years I had stood by, bucket in hand, ready to quench their every manufactured thirst. The desperation I felt was a physical thing. It was a tightness in my chest, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety that never quite went away. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me like a physical blanket. I had given them everything, and it was never enough. The pressure was mounting. The phone calls were becoming more frequent, Marcus's voice losing its charming edge and taking on a harder, more demanding tone. Clara had started sending me listings for small, depressing apartments in the worst parts of town. "Look, Elias," she'd texted. "This one is a steal, and so close to the bus stop. You wouldn't even need your car anymore. My car, the last vestige of my independence. They wanted that too." I looked around my small kitchen, at the faded floral wallpaper my mother had picked out, at the chipped mug I drank my tea from every morning. This wasn't just a house. It was my life. It was all I had left. And as I looked at that final notice on the table, I realized something. The desperation wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a choice. I could continue to let them bleed me dry, to fade into the background of their chaotic lives. Or I could do something. For the first time in a long time, a flicker of something other than fear ignited within me. It was small, and it was fragile, but it was there. It was anger, and it was about to change everything. That flicker of anger was a foreign feeling. For decades, my emotional landscape had been a flat, gray plain of quiet resignation. Anger was a mountain I had never dared to climb. I didn't know what to do with it, so I did what I always did. I retreated. I sought solace in the familiar rhythm of my life. I went to the library, stamped books with a satisfying thud, and lost myself in the quiet hum of the archives. I came home and tended to my mother's roses, their velvety petals a fragile shield against the world. I tried to pretend the conversation about selling my house had never happened. But a predator, once it has the scent of blood, does not simply wander off. The first wave of the new assault came on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, enjoying a rare moment of peace with a cup of tea and the morning paper, when a key turned in my front door lock. The sound jolted me. I live alone. I hadn't given a key to anyone in years. But then I remembered. Years ago, after a bad flu, I had given a spare to Marcus. "For emergencies," he had said. It seemed their entire life was now considered an emergency. Marcus and Clara swept into my house as if they owned it. Clara was carrying a stack of empty cardboard boxes, which she dropped onto my mother's antique rug with a dismissive thud. Marcus was holding a tape measure, his eyes already scanning the living room. Not as a space to be lived in, but as a collection of assets to be measured and sold. "Morning, Eli," Marcus boomed, his cheerfulness so false it was almost a physical blow. "Thought we'd come and give you a hand. No sense in you doing all this on your own." "Doing all what on my own?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My teacup rattled in its saucer. Clara smiled that razor-thin smile of hers. "The packing, silly. We can start with the books in the living room. They'll fetch a decent price, I imagine. We found a wonderful real estate agent, by the way. A real shark. She thinks we can get this place listed by the end of the month if we move quickly." We. The word hung in the air, a testament to how completely they had erased me from my own life. They weren't asking. They were informing me of a decision they had already made. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. I stood frozen in the doorway of my own kitchen, a stranger in my own home, as they began to dismantle my life. Marcus started measuring the bay window, whistling tunelessly while Clara walked around, tapping on furniture, her expression that of a hawk assessing its prey. "This old armchair will have to go," she declared, gesturing at the worn, comfortable chair where I read every evening. "Far too dated. Staging is everything, Elias. People need to be able to imagine their own lives here, not yours." The cruelty of that statement was breathtaking. My life, the quiet, simple existence I had carved out for myself, was an obstacle to be removed. I finally found my voice, a weak and trembling thing. "Please," I said. "Stop, this is my home. You can't just come in here and do this." Marcus turned, his smile finally dropping. A flicker of impatience, of the real man beneath the charming facade, crossed his face. "Eli, don't be difficult. We're doing this for your own good. This place is a money pit. The proceeds from this sale will set you up for life. It'll set us all up. That was the truth of it. It was never about me. It was about them. I was just the key to their financial salvation. I managed to get them to leave that day, but it was a hollow victory. They left the cardboard boxes in the middle of my living room, a silent, looming promise of their return. The violation of their presence lingered long after they were gone. The air felt thick with their greed. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a battlefield. The phone calls became the next front in their war of attrition. Clara in particular was relentless. She would call at all hours, her voice a syrupy blend of concern and coercion. She would talk about their debts, the sleepless nights, the stress Marcus was under. She painted a picture of a family on the brink of collapse, a collapse that I and I alone had the power to prevent. One night, the phone rang just as I was drifting off to sleep. It was Clara, her voice tight with theatrical panic. "Elias, I'm so sorry to call so late, but Marcus is just beside himself. He's talking about declaring bankruptcy. Our credit will be ruined. We'll lose everything. He says if we just had the deposit for this new venture, a sure thing this time, he could turn it all around." She paused, letting the silence stretch. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "He keeps saying you don't trust him." She continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "After all he's done for you, all he tries to do for this family, it's breaking his heart, Elias. It's breaking mine to see him like this. A small bridging loan against the house is all we need. The agent said it's simple. Just a signature." It was emotional blackmail of the highest order. She was trying to make me responsible for my brother's happiness, for his success, for their very survival. Every word was a carefully sharpened knife, designed to gut me with guilt. I felt the old familiar pull of duty, the lifetime of conditioning that screamed at me to say yes, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. But the anger was still there, a tiny glowing ember in the pit of my stomach. "Clara," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Marcus's business ventures are his own responsibility. This house is my only security." The silence on the other end of the line was cold and immediate. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by ice. "I see," she said, each syllable a frozen shard. "So it's like that. I guess we know where we stand. I hope you'll be happy here, Elias, all alone, with your security." She hung up. The final turn of the screw came a week later. Marcus appeared at the library during my lunch break. He cornered me between the towering shelves of the history section, his face pale and slick with sweat. The charming mask was gone completely. This was the real Marcus, desperate and dangerous. "We have a problem, Eli," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A big one. Remember that loan for the restaurant? The last one?" I nodded, my stomach clenching. "Well, the paperwork was complicated. I had to list you as a guarantor, not just you, the house. It's collateral." The books on the shelves around me seemed to sway. The air grew thin. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying that if I default, and I'm about to default, the bank doesn't come for me. They come for you. They come for the house." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. "You have to sell. It's the only way. We sell, we pay them off, and we use the rest for the new business. I can fix this, Eli, but you have to let me. You have to sign the listing agreement, now." It wasn't a request. It was a threat. He hadn't just gambled away my pension. He had gambled away my home without my knowledge. He had tied a rope around my neck while I slept And now he was telling me the only way to survive was to hand him the end of it. The pressure was no longer just emotional or psychological. It was a financial guillotine, hanging directly over my head, and my brother's hand was on the lever. The quiet life I had so carefully constructed was about to be obliterated. For 2 days after Marcus's confession at the library, I lived in a fog of pure, unadulterated terror. The world had tilted on its axis. My home, my fortress of solitude, was no longer mine. It was a bargaining chip in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a footstep of foreclosure. Every knock at the door sent a jolt of panic through my heart, expecting a bailiff, an officer of the court, someone coming to evict me from my own life. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. The ember of anger had been extinguished, doused by the cold tidal wave of fear. Then, on the 3rd day, Clara called. Her voice was completely different. There was no trace of the icy threat from our last conversation. It was warm, apologetic, and sickeningly sweet. "Elias, darling," she began, her tone as smooth as honey. "I am so sorry about the other day. I was stressed. Marcus was stressed. We haven't been ourselves. And he told me what he said to you at the library. He was just panicking, you know how he gets. He exaggerates. It's not as bad as he made it sound, truly." I was silent, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't believe her for a second, but a desperate part of me wanted to. "Look," she continued, "why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Just the 3 of us. We'll have a nice meal. I'll make your favorite pot roast, and we can talk this through properly. No pressure, no business. Just family. We need to clear the air. Please, Elias, for me." Every instinct screamed at me to say no. It was a trap. The invitation was a baited hook, and I could feel the sharp point of it even through the phone line. But I was so tired. I was exhausted from the fear, from the loneliness, from the weight of it all. The thought of a home-cooked meal, of a moment that might feel normal, was a siren song to my weary soul. And so, against my better judgment, I heard myself agree. It was a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. Their house was the opposite of mine. It was modern, sterile, and cold, full of sharp angles and gleaming surfaces that reflected everything but warmth. Marcus greeted me at the door with a hug that felt more like a capture, his hand lingering on my back as he guided me inside. Clara was in the kitchen fussing over the stove, the picture of domestic bliss. For the first hour, it was almost convincing. We ate pot roast. We talked about inconsequential things. The weather, a neighbor's new car, a television show. It was a meticulous performance of normalcy. But as the plates were cleared, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus poured us all another glass of wine, but his movements were tense, his eyes darting towards the front door. Clara wasn't meeting my gaze anymore. "Elias," Marcus started, clearing his throat. "About the other day. I know I came on a bit strong." "It's all right," I mumbled, wanting to avoid what I knew was coming. "No, it's not," he said, leaning forward, his voice taking on a new urgency. "The situation is delicate, but we have a solution. A perfect one, in fact. One that gets everyone out of this mess and puts us on the right path." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like the tolling of a bell. Clara went to answer it, and when she returned, she was not alone. She was followed by 2 people, a woman in a sharp, tailored suit carrying a leather briefcase, and a portly, sweating man clutching a notary's stamp like a holy seal. "Elias," Clara said with a brilliant, predatory smile. "This is Susan, the real estate agent I was telling you about. And this is Mr. Gable, a notary public. We thought, just to make things easier, we could handle all the paperwork tonight. Right here." The trap had sprung. The room felt airless, the walls closing in. The pot roast sat like a lead weight in my stomach. This wasn't a family dinner. It was an execution. My execution. Susan, the agent, didn't even bother with pleasantries. She opened her briefcase on the dining room table, right next to the salt shaker, and produced a sheaf of papers. "It's all very straightforward," she said, her voice crisp and impersonal. "This is the listing agreement for your property, and this," she pushed a second document towards me, "is a power of attorney granting Marcus the authority to manage the sale and the dispersal of funds. It will be much quicker this way. We just need your signature on the highlighted lines." I stared at the papers. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the intent was crystal clear. They wanted me to sign away my home and control of all the money that came from it. They wanted to erase me completely. I looked from the papers to my brother's face, searching for any sign of shame, of regret, of shed blood. There was nothing, only a desperate, hungry impatience. I looked at Clara and saw only cold, triumphant calculation. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered. It was the final crushing weight that pulverizes a structure already weakened by 1,000 cracks. The lifetime of yielding, of sacrificing, of making myself smaller to accommodate their endless needs. It all collapsed into a pile of dust, and rising from the ruins was not fear, not sadness, but a towering, magnificent rage. A rage so pure and so cold, it felt like ice water flooding my veins. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. I slowly reached out and picked up the pen. Marcus let out a sigh of relief. Susan, the agent, pointed to the first signature line. I looked down at the paper, at the clinical black and white text that would sign away my entire life. Then I looked up, meeting my brother's eager gaze, and I smiled. I placed the pen back on the table, very gently. "No," I said. The word was quiet, almost a whisper, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Marcus's face fell. "What, Eli, don't be a fool. We don't have time for this." "No," I said again, louder this time. My voice didn't tremble. It was hard, like stone. "This is my house, not yours. You will not sell it. You will not touch it. You will not use it to clean up the messes you've made." Clara stepped forward, her face a mask of disbelief. "Elias, after everything we've done for you." I laughed, a real, actual laugh. The sound was so foreign it shocked even me. "Done for me? What have you done for me, Clara? Except drain my pension, bleed my savings, and now try to steal the roof over my head? You don't see a brother. You see a bank account. And I'm telling you now, the bank is closed." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. I looked at the shocked faces of the agent and the notary, then back at my brother and his wife. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. I saw them for what they were, weak, pathetic, and desperate, and I was done being their solution. "Get out of my life," I said, the words tasting like freedom. "Both of you, stay away from my home, and stay away from me." I walked out of their cold, sterile house without looking back. I left them sitting there with their useless papers and their shocked expressions. I walked into the cool night air, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how I would fight the bank or untangle the mess Marcus had made. But I knew one thing for certain. The silent obedience was over. The war had just begun. And for the first time, I was ready to fight. Walking away from my brother's house that night felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. It was a terrifying, exhilarating free fall into the unknown. The rage that had propelled me out their door carried me home. But once I was back inside my own four walls, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the cold, stark realities of my situation. I had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Marcus had been right about one thing. The bank didn't care about family drama. It cared about signatures on a dotted line. My signature. My house was still very much on the line. For the first time, I understood the true depth of my isolation. I had spent so many years catering to Marcus and Clara that my own world had shrunk to the size of my house and the library. I had no one to turn to, no one to ask for advice. The despair began to creep back in, a familiar, suffocating fog. I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd stared at the final notice, and felt the walls of the trap Marcus had built closing in again. But something was different this time. The breaking point hadn't just been an outburst. It had been a seismic shift within me. The old Elias, the compliant, quiet, path of least resistance. Elias had died in my brother's dining room. In his place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who was terrified, yes, but also stubbornly unwilling to lie down and be destroyed. If I was going to fight, I couldn't do it alone. I needed a weapon. I needed knowledge. My mind started sifting through the archives of my past, through decades of forgotten acquaintances and faded friendships. And then, a name surfaced, Arthur Vance. We had been roommates in college, two quiet boys who preferred books to parties. He was the smartest person I had ever known, with a mind like a steel trap and a fierce, unwavering sense of justice. We'd lost touch over the years, as people do, but I knew he'd gone on to become a lawyer, a very good one. Finding him felt like a shot in the dark, but after an hour of searching online, I found him. He was a partner at a small, respected law firm in the city, specializing in estate and financial law. His profile picture showed an older man, his hair now silver, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and serious. With a trembling hand and a heart full of prayer, I dialed the number. When his secretary put me through, I barely managed to stammer out my name. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a voice, deeper and more gravelly than I remembered, but unmistakably his. Elias Thorne? As I live and breathe. I haven't heard that name in 30 years. To what do I owe the pleasure? The dam of my composure broke. The story came pouring out of me, a jumbled, desperate torrent of pension funds, restaurant schemes, coercion, and collateral. I told him everything, my voice cracking with shame and fear. I expected him to be dismissive, to tell me I was a fool, to say it was a family matter and he couldn't get involved. Instead, he just listened. He listened with a profound, patient silence that was more comforting than any words could have been. When I was finished, there was another long pause. "Arthur?" I finally whispered, afraid he'd hung up. "I'm here, Elias," he said, and his voice had changed. The friendly warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. It was the voice of a lawyer who had just been handed a case that offended his every professional and moral fiber. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9? And Elias, don't speak to your brother or his wife. Don't answer their calls. Don't reply to their texts. Do not engage with them in any way. Am I clear?" "Yes," I said. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washing over me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in the storm. Arthur's office was exactly what I'd expected. Lined with law books, smelling of old paper and leather, a bastion of order and reason. He sat me down, gave me a cup of coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, and looked at me over the top of his glasses. "They committed fraud, Elias," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "What your brother did, leveraging your home as collateral, without your full, informed consent, is textbook financial fraud. The emotional manipulation, the coercion, that's elder abuse. They didn't just take your money. They committed a crime." He spoke the words so calmly, so factually, that they cut through all my shame and self-blame. I wasn't just a fool who had been taken for a ride. I was a victim. And for victims, there were remedies. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We don't get emotional," Arthur said, tapping a pen on a yellow legal pad. "We get organized. We get evidence. We build a wall of facts so high that your brother's charm and your sister-in-law's tears can't get over it. We are going to conduct a quiet investigation. You are going to become a detective in your own life." He gave me a list. First, I was to go through every drawer, every shoebox, every dusty corner of my house, and find any and all financial documents from the last 10 years. Bank statements, tax returns, loan agreements, receipts, anything with my name or Marcus's name on it. Second, he wanted me to document every request for money. I was to write down every single instance I could remember, with dates, amounts, and the reason they gave. Details are your best friend, Elias, he'd said. For the next week, I lived a double life. To the outside world, I was the same quiet librarian, but at night, my house became a command center. I tore through my old filing cabinets, unearthing a paper trail of my own destruction. I found the withdrawal slip for my pension, a staggering sum. I found copies of checks I'd written to Marcus, with memos like business loan or car trouble in my neat, trusting script. Each document was a fresh stab of pain, a monument to my own naivety. But with Arthur's words in my head, I saw them differently now. They were no longer symbols of my foolishness. They were exhibits. They were evidence. The most damning piece of proof I found by accident. I was cleaning out my old, rarely used car and found a small digital voice recorder I'd forgotten I owned. I used to use it to record notes for library cataloging. On a whim, I checked the memory card, and there it was. A recording from nearly 2 years ago. I had been in the car with Marcus, on speakerphone with his bank, trying to understand a complicated wire transfer he'd asked me to make. The recording captured the whole conversation. The banker clearly explaining that the funds were for a high-risk, unsecured business loan, and Marcus in the background, whispering to me, "Just agree, Eli. It's just a formality for the down payment on our new house. It's perfectly safe." It was a lie, a clear, calculated, and now a provable lie. I sat in my quiet garage, listening to the voice of the man who had systematically dismantled my life. And I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard certainty of the righteous. Arthur was right. This was a crime, and my brother was a criminal. I saved a copy of the file and emailed it to Arthur with a simple subject line, Exhibit A. The secret strategy was in motion. The hunt had begun. For the 2 weeks that followed my discovery of the voice recorder, the silence was deafening. Just as Arthur had instructed, I didn't answer their calls. I let the increasingly frantic texts go unread. At first, they were angry and demanding. Then, as the silence stretched on, they became laced with confusion. And finally, a desperate, manipulative concern. It was a strange and intoxicating feeling. To hold the power of my own absence, to deny them the access they had always taken for granted. While they were floundering in the dark, Arthur and I were preparing for the dawn. We were building our case, arranging my paper trail of evidence into an irrefutable narrative of deceit. The summons came not from me, but from Arthur's firm. A crisp, formal letter, delivered by courier, requesting the presence of Mr. Marcus Thorne and Mrs. Clara Thorne at a meeting to discuss urgent financial matters concerning their brother. Arthur said it was important that the confrontation happen on our terms, on neutral ground where their usual tactics of emotional warfare would be rendered useless. He was right. The conference room at his firm felt like another world, a place of hard facts and unyielding consequences. I felt a tremor of fear in my hands as I waited, but it was different now. It was the nervous energy of a soldier before a battle he knows he is prepared for, not the helpless terror of a lamb awaiting the slaughter. Arthur sat beside me, a bastion of calm authority. He gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze just as the door opened. Marcus and Clara entered, and for a moment I saw them through Arthur's eyes. They were not the intimidating figures who had dominated my life for so long. They looked small and garish under the fluorescent lights of the office. Marcus's usual bravado was a thin, brittle veneer over a foundation of panic. Clara's face was pale, her usual poise replaced by a pinched, anxious expression. They saw me, and then they saw Arthur, and their faces tightened. "What is this, Elias?" Marcus demanded, attempting to seize control of the room. "Hiring a lawyer? Isn't this a bit dramatic even for you?" Arthur didn't rise to the bait. He simply gestured to the empty chairs. "Please, sit down, Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne." His voice was perfectly level, carrying an authority that Marcus's bluster could not match. They sat reluctantly, looking deeply uncomfortable in the stiff leather chairs. "My name is Arthur Vance. he began, his hand steepled on the table. "I am representing Elias in this matter. We've asked you here today to discuss a series of financial transactions and agreements that have put my client in a position of extreme legal and financial jeopardy." Clara attempted a pained, sorrowful expression. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice soft and pleading as she looked at me. "Elias, we're family. We can sort this out ourselves. There's no need for all this." This was my moment. This was the precipice I had been climbing toward. I pushed the manila folder across the table toward them. "I think the time for sorting it out ourselves is over, Clara," I said. My voice was steady. It was my voice, but it was a version I had never heard before. It was clear and strong. Marcus scoffed, but he opened the folder. Inside, laid out in chronological order, were the documents: the withdrawal slip for my pension, the copies of dozens of checks, the loan agreements I had co-signed. I watched their eyes scan the pages. I saw Marcus's face drain of color as he realized the sheer volume of the evidence. This is just family helping family," he stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. "Is that what you call it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Let's talk about my pension, Marcus. The money I was supposed to retire on. You called it a can't-miss investment. The restaurant that was supposed to make us all rich. But it didn't, did it? It failed. And my pension, my entire future, vanished with it. I was going to pay you back," he insisted, his voice rising. "When?" I pressed. "When you asked for another $5,000 for your car? Or another $10,000 for your credit card debt? Or was it when you convinced me to use my house as collateral for your next sure thing?" This hit home. Clara flinched as if I'd struck her. Marcus just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Arthur slid a small digital recorder onto the center of the table. "We also have this," he said calmly. "A recording of a conversation between you, Elias, and your loan officer. A conversation in which you, Marcus, explicitly lie about the nature of the loan, reassuring your brother that it is perfectly safe and has nothing to do with your high-risk business, when in fact it was a direct guarantee against his primary residence." The air left the room. It was a checkmate, a complete and utter checkmate. The blustering, the charm, the manipulation. It was all gone. All that was left was the ugly, squirming truth of their greed. Clara was the first to break. She began to cry, but they were not the convincing, heart-wrenching tears of before. They were the thin, pathetic tears of someone who had been caught. "Elias, we were desperate," she sobbed. "You can't do this to us. We'll be ruined." "Ruined," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You were so worried about being ruined that you were willing to see me on the street. You came into my home with a real estate agent and a notary to trick me into signing away the last thing I have in this world. You didn't care about ruining me." I stood up, feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in my entire life. I was no longer their victim. I was the one with the power. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, my voice ringing with finality. Arthur slid a new set of documents across the table. "You, Marcus, are going to take out a personal loan, sell your car, do whatever you have to do to remove the lien against my house. You have 30 days. Secondly, you are both going to sign this document. It is a legally binding agreement, a promissory note for the pension funds you took, with a structured repayment plan. It also states that you will never again, for the rest of your lives, ask me for any financial assistance of any kind." Marcus stared at the papers, speechless. "And if we don't?" he finally whispered. Arthur leaned forward. "If you don't?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Then on day 31, we will file a civil suit for the full amount, plus damages. We will also turn over this folder, including the recording, to the district attorney's office. I've taken the liberty of looking up the relevant statutes. What you've done carries a potential sentence of 3 to 5 years in prison for fraud, for elder abuse." The room was silent save for Clara's quiet, defeated sobs. The choice was theirs, but it wasn't a choice at all. It was the closing of a trap they had set for me, but had in the end stepped into themselves. I had walked into that room a victim, but I was walking out of it free. In the days following the confrontation at Arthur's office, a profound quiet settled over my life. The constant buzzing anxiety that had been my companion for years had finally subsided. The phone didn't ring. There were no manipulative texts demanding my attention. It was as if a long and painful fever had broken. I had expected to feel triumphant, but instead what I felt was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, followed by a tentative, fragile peace. I rediscovered the simple rhythms of my own existence. I spent hours in my garden, my hands in the soil, feeling grounded and connected to the earth. I read books not as an escape, but for the pure joy of it. I was a man learning the forgotten language of his own contentment. I knew, of course, that it was just the calm before the storm. Arthur had warned me. "They've lost the legal battle, Elias," he'd said over the phone. "So now they'll turn to the only weapons they have left, guilt and emotional blackmail. They will try to make you feel responsible for the consequences of their own actions. Prepare yourself." But I wasn't prepared. Not really. Because I never imagined they would stoop so low as to use their own child as a weapon. The call came on a Sunday afternoon. I didn't recognize the number and I almost let it go to voicemail. But some instinct made me answer. It was my niece, Lily, Marcus and Clara's 17-year-old daughter. Her voice was small and choked with tears. "Uncle Elias," she whispered. "Is it true?" My heart seized in my chest. Lily and I had always been close. She was a quiet, gentle soul, a book lover like me. When she was younger, I would take her to the library, and we would spend hours exploring the shelves. She was the one part of that family that had always felt pure, untainted by her parents' endless scheming. "Is what true, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice gentle. Mom said you're suing them," she sobbed. "She said you're trying to send Dad to jail, and that we're going to lose our house. She said you hate them. Do you hate us, Uncle Elias? What did we do?" Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking me in the most vulnerable part of my soul. They had twisted the narrative into a grotesque caricature. In their version, I was the aggressor, the monster who had appeared out of nowhere to destroy their happy family. They had poisoned my relationship with the one person I still loved. The guilt was instantaneous and overwhelming. It rose up in me like a black tide, threatening to drown the fragile peace I had built. Had I gone too far? Was I tearing a family apart? My hand trembled as I held the phone. The old Elias, the fixer, the peacekeeper, wanted to rush in and smooth everything over. He wanted to say, No, it's all a mistake. I'll fix it. Don't cry." But Arthur's voice was a firm anchor in my mind. "This is a tactic. This is predictable." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "Lily," I said, and my voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "What's happening between your parents and me is very complicated. It's about adult things, business things, that have gone wrong over a long, long time. It has nothing to do with you. I could never ever hate you. You are my beloved niece. But Mom's crying all the time," she pleaded. "And Dad just sits in his study all day. He looks sick. Can't you just talk to them? Forgive them, please? Forgive them." They wanted forgiveness without remorse. They wanted absolution without accountability. They were using their daughter's love as a shield, forcing me into the position of the cruel, unforgiving villain. It was the most masterful and wicked manipulation they had ever orchestrated. "This isn't about forgiveness right now, Lily," I said, the words tasting like acid. "It's about making sure everyone is safe and secure, including me. I'm so sorry you've been put in the middle of this. It's not fair to you." I ended the call, my heart feeling as though it had been physically bruised. The peace I had felt was gone, replaced by a churning sea of doubt and self-recrimination. The quiet of my house was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The final assault came a few days later. Marcus ambushed me as I was leaving the library. He didn't look like my charismatic older brother anymore. He looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had lost weight. He didn't yell. He didn't demand anything. He just stood there, looking utterly broken. "Eli," he said, his voice raspy. "You've won. Okay? You've won. I'm selling my car. I'm talking to the bank. I'll get the lien off the house. Just, please, don't do this to us. Clara is a wreck. Lily won't come out of her room. You're destroying us." He slumped against the wall, the picture of a defeated man. "I messed up, I know," he whispered. "I always mess up. I just wanted to provide for my family, to give them the life they deserved. I never meant to hurt you. You're my little brother." It was the most dangerous he had ever been. Not when he was angry, not when he was charming. But now, when he was pathetic, he was appealing to the 40 years of history between us. To the boy who used to look up to his big brother. To the man who had spent a lifetime cleaning up his messes. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to put my arm around him, to tell him it would be okay, to take the papers back from Arthur and tear them up. But as I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw the lie. It was in the flicker of his eyes, the calculated slump of his shoulders. This was not remorse. This was a performance. It was one last, desperate gambit to find the switch that would turn me back into his compliant, reliable resource. And for the first time, I realized that true strength wasn't the rage I felt in his dining room. It was this. It was standing here in the quiet evening light, looking at the brother I loved, a man who was an expert at playing my heartstrings, and choosing to protect myself anyway. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. "Sign the papers, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Do what you agreed to do. That's the only way forward." I turned and walked away, not waiting for a reply. I didn't look back. Every step was an agony. It felt like I was severing a limb. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was the only way to save the rest of me. The trial was not over, but I had not buckled. I had held the line. Walking away from Marcus at the library was the final, painful amputation of a part of my life that had long since turned gangrenous. The pain was sharp and real, but for the first time there was no poison seeping into the rest of my system. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my brother and his wife was absolute. Arthur handled the legal proceedings, and true to my word, Marcus began the slow, arduous process of untangling his mess from my life. The lien on my house was lifted. The first small payment on the promissory note appeared in my bank account. It was over. But freedom, I discovered, is a vast and empty room. For 40 years, my life had been defined by their needs, their dramas, their endless cascade of emergencies. My own wants and desires were a distant country I had never visited. Now, with the noise gone, the silence was overwhelming. I found myself rattling around in my own house, a ghost at a feast I didn't know how to eat. The peace I had fought so hard for felt dangerously close to simple loneliness. I had saved my life, but I had forgotten how to live it. The change began in the attic. I was looking for an old suitcase and stumbled upon a large, dust-covered wooden box tucked away under the eaves. My hand stilled when I saw it. I knew what it was. I hadn't opened it in almost 30 years. Inside, nestled amongst dried-up tubes of paint and stiff, forgotten brushes, was a half-finished canvas. It was a landscape of the small woods behind our house, painted on a summer afternoon long ago. I remembered the day perfectly. I had been so proud of it. And then Marcus had come along, looked at it with a smirk, and asked if I was going to sell it at a craft fair for $5. The shame had been so acute, so piercing, that I had packed it all away that very evening and never touched it again. Staring at the dusty canvas now, I felt not shame but a profound sense of loss. I had allowed his casual cruelty to steal something I loved. A quiet resolve settled over me. I carried the box downstairs, cleaned the brushes, and bought a new set of paints. The first strokes were clumsy and uncertain. My hands felt like foreign objects. But as the hours passed, something began to awaken within me. The scent of the oil paint, the feel of the brush on the canvas, the joy of watching color and light take shape. It was like finding a lost piece of my own soul. I wasn't just painting a landscape. I was reclaiming my own. That small act of defiance opened a door. If I could reclaim this part of myself, what else was waiting to be discovered? The local community center became my next frontier. Their brochure was full of possibilities that seemed both terrifying and thrilling. Pottery, woodworking, a choir. My eyes landed on a listing for a weekly hiking group, the Saturday Strollers. The idea of being out in nature, surrounded by people but without the pressure of forced conversation, seemed manageable. The first Saturday, I almost turned back 3 times. I felt awkward and out of place amongst the cheerful, chattering group. But then a woman with kind eyes and a warm, open smile introduced herself. Her name was Eleanor, a retired history teacher. She didn't ask intrusive questions. She just walked alongside me, pointing out different types of birds and talking about the history of the old stone walls that crisscrossed the forest. For the first time in years, I had a conversation that wasn't a negotiation, that wasn't laced with hidden agendas or unspoken requests. It was just a conversation. The hiking group became my anchor. Every Saturday I was there. I started talking more, sharing small things about my work at the library, about my newfound passion for painting. I made friends, people like Eleanor, and a quiet carpenter named Ben, and a boisterous woman who owned the local bakery. After our hikes, we would go for coffee. They would talk about their lives, their children, their travels, and they would ask about mine. They were interested in me. Not what I could do for them, but who I was. My world began to fill with color. I started cooking again, not just for sustenance, but for pleasure. Trying new recipes, filling my quiet house with the scent of garlic and herbs. I set up a permanent easel in the sunroom, and my canvases, no longer hidden in the attic, began to fill the walls. They weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. They were a visible record of my own joy. One afternoon, I was sitting in my garden sketching in a notebook when Eleanor from the hiking group stopped by. She was on a walk and had seen me through the hedge. I always wondered who was responsible for these beautiful roses, she said, smiling. I invited her in, and we sat on my small patio drinking tea. She told me about her late husband, and I for the first time told her a little about mine. Not the painful details of Marcus and Clara, but the story of my quiet life, of my parents, of the library. As she was leaving, she paused and looked at one of the paintings I had propped up against the wall to dry. It was a painting of the forest path the Saturday strollers always took. "You have a real gift, Elias," she said, her voice soft. "You see the light in things." Her words settled in my heart, a gentle healing balm. All my life I had been told I was a resource, a tool, a means to an end. My value was in what I could provide. But Eleanor and my new life saw something different. They saw me. They saw the light in me. And as I stood there in my garden, surrounded by the vibrant life I was finally allowing myself to build, I realized I was happy, genuinely, peacefully happy. I wasn't just the brother, the son, the caretaker. I was Elias. The painter, the hiker, the friend, and it was more than enough. It was everything. The new life I was building was a delicate ecosystem. It thrived on peace, on predictability, on the absence of emotional turmoil. My friendships with Eleanor and the Saturday strollers were like gentle, steady rain, nurturing the parts of me that had been dormant for decades. My painting was the sun, providing warmth and color and a sense of purpose. For months, this new world flourished, and I began to believe the old one had faded for good. I began to believe the walls I had built around my heart were high enough. But the past has a way of sending out tendrils, of testing the foundations of the present. The first tendril arrived in a plain white envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's. My first instinct was to throw it in the bin. Unopened, the new Elias, the one who went hiking on Saturdays, would have done just that. But the old Elias, the one conditioned by a lifetime of obligation, hesitated. That hesitation was all it took. I opened it. It wasn't a request for money. It was far more insidious than that. It was a letter full of feigned remorse and weaponized nostalgia. She wrote about the holidays we used to spend together, about a time I'd helped Marcus fix his first car, about how Lily missed her uncle. She painted a picture of a broken family, grieving the loss of a connection that I had severed. She never once acknowledged the reason for the rift. In her telling, my actions were a mysterious, cruel act of nature, a sudden storm that had wrecked their lives. The letter ended with a simple, poisonous question. Isn't it time to let bygones be bygones and be a family again? The letter sat on my kitchen counter for a day. A quiet, toxic presence. It didn't send me into a spiral of guilt like Lily's phone call had, but it did something else. It disturbed my peace. It was a reminder that, in their minds, the door was still open. They were just waiting for me to soften, to forget, to fall back into my old role. I realized then that the informal silence was not enough. The absence of contact was not the same as a formal, declared boundary. For my new world to be truly safe, I had to completely and irrevocably seal the entrances to the old one. My first act was the phone. For 40 years I'd had the same number. It was a direct line into my life, one that Marcus and Clara had used as their personal emergency hotline for decades. Changing it felt like a monumental step, like faking my own death in a small way. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the phone store for a full 20 minutes before going in, my old phone heavy in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts one last time. Marcus, Clara, Lily. With a deep breath, I walked inside. "I'd like to change my number, please," I told the young man at the counter. "And I'd like the new one to be unlisted." The process took less than 10 minutes. I walked out with a new number that only I knew. I felt a pang of sadness for the connections I was losing, for the friends from the past who might try to call the old number and find it gone. But it was overshadowed by a profound, cleansing sense of relief. I had taken away their power. They could no longer reach into my home at any hour of the day or night and disrupt my peace. The silence was now my own creation, a deliberate choice. The final thread was a financial one, a detail so small I had almost forgotten it. It was a joint savings account our mother had opened for Marcus and me when we were boys. It held a trivial amount, less than $200, the last vestiges of birthday money from our childhood. It was a symbolic link to our shared past. One morning I received a bank notification that a withdrawal had been attempted, but denied due to inactivity on the account. It was Marcus. Even after everything, after the legal agreements, and the forced repayment plan, he was still trying to take the last few dollars we shared. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. It was the final pathetic proof that he would never ever stop seeing me as a resource to be tapped. That afternoon I went to the bank. I stood in front of a teller and formally closed the account. I had her divide the remaining balance exactly in half. My half I deposited into my own account. His half I had her make out into a cashier's check. My last official meeting with Arthur was to give him that check. "Could you please forward this to my brother?" I asked him. "I'd prefer there be no direct contact." Arthur took the check and nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. "This is it, then," he said. "All the legal and financial ties are officially severed. You're a free man, Elias. A free man." The words echoed in my mind as I drove home. I had changed my number. I had closed the last account. I had sent back the last dollar. I had methodically, deliberately, and irrevocably cut every cord that bound me to my old life. The letter from Clara was in the recycling bin. My new silent phone sat on the kitchen table. There was a quiet melancholy in the finality of it all. A sadness for the brother I wished I'd had, for the family that could have been. But it was a clean, healthy sadness, not the toxic, churning guilt of before. I walked into my sunroom and looked at my easel. A new canvas was waiting, bright white and full of possibility. The house was quiet. The phone was silent. The old world was gone. And for the first time, I felt no fear about what lay ahead. I felt only peace. The profound, unshakable peace of a man who was finally, completely, the sole architect of his own life. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet, uninterrupted, and deeply satisfying peace. The life I had built, once a fragile seedling, had grown into a sturdy, resilient tree, deeply rooted in its newfound soil. My friendship with Eleanor and the Saturday strollers became the bedrock of my social life. My art, my beautiful, unexpected art, became my passion. I even sold a few paintings at a local art fair. A moment of validation so pure, it brought tears to my eyes. The ghosts of my past life, of Marcus and Clara, and their endless, grinding need, had finally faded. I rarely thought of them anymore. The promissory note payments arrived in my account each month, like clockwork, handled by Arthur's firm, a cold and distant reminder of a battle long since won. I had come to believe that my family story was over, that I had written the final chapter and closed the book for good. But life, I've learned, is rarely so tidy. Sometimes it writes an epilogue when you least expect it. It happened on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was finishing my shift at the library, stamping the last of the returned books, when I saw her. She was standing near the exit, half hidden behind a tall shelf of biographies, looking nervous. It was my niece, Lily. I hadn't seen her since she was a teenager. She was a young woman now, 20 years old, with the same gentle eyes but a new, quiet maturity in her posture. My first primal instinct was to retreat. My heart rate kicked up, and the old familiar defenses began to rise. A part of me wanted to slip out the back entrance and avoid the confrontation I assumed was coming. But she saw me, and a small hesitant smile touched her lips. She didn't approach me. She just waited, giving me the choice. And in that small act of respect, I saw that this was not the child sent by her parents to do their bidding. This was someone else. Taking a slow breath, I walked towards her. "Lily," I said. My voice was neutral, cautious. "Hi, Uncle Elias," she said, her own voice barely above a whisper. I know this is unexpected. I'm sorry to just show up, but I couldn't call you, and I really wanted to talk to you." We stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the quiet hum of the library around us. "I'm in college now," she offered. "At the State University. I'm studying art history. Because of you, actually. Because of the days you used to bring me here." The words were a small, unexpected warmth in my carefully guarded heart. "I'm glad to hear that, Lily," I said, and I meant it. She clutched her books to her chest. "I came here today to apologize," she said, finally meeting my eyes directly. Her gaze was clear and sincere. "For that phone call a few years ago. I was a kid. I didn't understand. I just knew Mom was crying and Dad was angry. And they told me a story where you were the villain, and I believed them." She took a shaky breath. "But I'm not a kid anymore. Living away from home, you get distance. You start to see things. I've seen how they operate, how they talk about people, how everything is always someone else's fault. I started piecing things together, things I'd overheard, and I realized the story they told me wasn't true. I don't know all the details, but I know they hurt you. And I know they used me to try and hurt you more. And for that, I am so sorry." Her apology was a clean, simple thing. It was unburdened by excuses or justifications. It was just the truth. And it disarmed me completely. The walls I had so carefully constructed around my heart didn't crumble. But a small gate, one I didn't even know existed, creaked open. I found myself leading her to a small, quiet alcove with 2 comfortable chairs. We sat down. "It was a difficult time," I said, the understatement of a lifetime. "They're still them," she said with a sad smile. "They talk about you sometimes. They've rewritten history. Now, the story is about their ungrateful brother who abandoned them in their time of need. They actually believe it, I think." She shook her head. "I love them. They're my parents. But I can't live in their fantasy world anymore. It's lonely there." She looked at me, her expression full of a hope so fragile it was almost painful to see. "I miss you, Uncle Elias. I miss talking about books. I miss the person who taught me what a catalog was. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you because of their mistakes. I was hoping, maybe, that you and I could have a relationship, a separate one, just us. No parents involved. Here it was, the crossroads I never thought I'd face. Letting her in felt like a risk. It was a potential bridge back to a world that had nearly destroyed me. But as I looked at this thoughtful, brave young woman who had crossed a minefield of family loyalty to come and find me, to offer a truth and an apology, I saw not a risk, but a possibility. The possibility that a family connection could be rebuilt, not on the rotten foundations of the past, but on the new, solid ground of honesty and respect. My answer came more easily than I could have imagined. "My relationship with your parents is over, Lily," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "That will never change. That is a boundary I have to keep to be healthy. You have to understand that." She nodded immediately. "I do. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." A real smile, the first one since she'd arrived, touched my lips. "But you," I said. "You are not your parents. And I miss the girl who loved the library, too." I stood up. "How about we get a coffee next week? Just us. And you can tell me all about art history." The relief that washed over her face was a beautiful thing to see. It was a glimmer of light, a promise that not everything from the past was lost. It was not a grand reunion. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something small and quiet and real. It was a seed of a new beginning, planted in the ruins of the old. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt like hope. My life today is a world away from the silent, gray existence I once endured. The house that was once my fortress against loneliness has become a center of warmth and community. The quiet that once felt like an absence of life now feels like a presence of peace. It's a life I never could have imagined, because I had never allowed myself the luxury of imagination. My future had always been a continuation of my past, a straight, narrow road of duty and sacrifice. I never knew that I held the power to simply step off that road and blaze my own trail through the woods. My relationship with Lily is a testament to that. It is a slow, careful thing, built on the quiet joy of shared interests. We have our weekly coffee. We talk about art, about books, about her dreams for the future. We never talk about her parents. It is our unspoken rule, a boundary that we both respectfully maintain. Through her, I've learned that family doesn't have to be a chain that binds you. It can be a connection you choose, a bridge you build, plank by plank, with trust and honesty. She is the beautiful, hopeful epilogue to a story I once thought was a tragedy. My friendship with Eleanor and the others has become my chosen family. They are people who ask for nothing but my company, and who give their own in return. With them, I am not a resource. I am just Elias. We hike, we drink coffee, we share the small, ordinary details of our lives. They have shown me that connection is not about what you can do for someone, but about who you are with them. My art remains my most intimate conversation with myself. My sunroom is a beautiful, chaotic mess of canvases and paints, a testament to a voice I kept silent for far too long. Each painting is a victory. Each stroke of the brush is an act of freedom. When I look at them on my walls, I don't just see landscapes and still lifes. I see my own resilience. I see the colors of a life I fought for. I still think about Marcus and Clara sometimes. Not with anger, not anymore. And certainly not with guilt. I think of them with a kind of distant, clinical sadness. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, a world of perceived scarcity, where they believed the only way to get ahead was to take from others. They taught me the most painful, but also the most valuable lesson of my life. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I learned that my own well-being is not a selfish indulgence. It is a profound responsibility. I learned that no is not a word of rejection, but an act of self-respect. It is the sound a boundary makes when it is being built. For anyone out there who feels trapped, who feels that their life is being lived for someone else, I want you to know that it is never too late. The walls you feel around you are not as solid as you think. Your identity is not defined by the roles others have assigned to you. You are not just a brother, a sister, a parent, or a child. You are the architect of your own soul.